right. Hi, folks. Steven here. So, this is going to be another one of our live streams. Tonight, we're talking about the music of Super Smash Brothers Brawl for the Wii. Um, let's see. Anne should be here shortly. We did do our test stream earlier, so I know that unless something's happened in between, she's going to be around. There she is. So give her just a second to get set up, and then I'll add her to the stream there. All right. There you go. Hey, a little bit of a different thing. I did get some new, I guess you could call them toys over the winter break. Um, so, some of the folks at home may notice I have different headphones on today. I also have, well, that's kind of the main thing. I did have a throw I got that I tried to position somewhere, but I ended up just sort of tossing behind that away to hopefully absorb a little more sound. But I kind of wanted to use it as a backdrop, but it just wasn't the right shape or size. So. And I informed during our pre-show, I do not have another AI art quiz thing for her this time around, so we won't be doing that. Given how she performed on the last one, she's told me, yeah, she's. I can't guarantee it won't show up again though if I get some other ideas, but
that's okay. Give me a little time to build my skills and my luck up, and we'll tackle this again.
That's okay. And you want to tell folks what you've been up to?
Yeah, so I've been running Pikapi Podcast. We finally got through Man Max's family drama in the Hoenn region, which means I'm about ready to cover the episode with Norman, the gym battle. It's actually all recorded, just needs to be edited. So finally, that's happening. Yeah. So yeah, just Pikapi Podcast.
Okay. Yeah, as far as stuff I've been working on, if you've been following the podcast feed, last weekend I finally got out the My Pokemon Ranch / Pokemon Music Trivia round, which Anne did much better on, by the way. We recorded that last summer. So she ended up doing considerably better on that one. So let's see. But yeah, tonight is Super Smash Brothers Brawl. This is our break in between the 4th and 5th generation games. Actually, it took me a little bit. I think I've looked it up before, but it's a little confusing to figure out exactly what the first 5th generation side game is. So it was a little bit of that. Let's see, just booting up a few devices here. I'm trying to think of anything else. We're kind of in a lull. Usually January is a bit of a lull for Pokemon news, although because we think obviously next month is February, which means on 27th they'll have Pokemon Day, and one thing we're expecting is a big patch for Scarlet and Violet, and so on. So, but I'm expecting there'll be some other announcements. I do hope that they are doing something side game wise this year. I'm sure there'll be some DLC for Scarlet and Violet, but I am hoping that they have something else in the mix there. But we'll see exactly what happens. I'm hoping they're doing something, movie-wise this year. That'd be really nice. Because we didn't get anything last year, and so on. Let's see. If you have any comments on anything we discussed today, be sure to toss those into the chat. We'll be monitoring that, and we'll be trying at least to work those into the discussion. If you're watching this on replay, feel free to give us a comment or drop us an email, pokepress@gmail.com, or at pokepress on Twitter. And we'll try to work those into a future discussion. But yeah, so I'm not sure exactly how long this will be. We did pick out the usual number of songs because of the structure being quite different, both from our regular side game or movie discussions and from our whatchamacallit. Oh, and from we did a combined discussion of Super Smash Bros. 64 and Melee a couple years ago. So it'll all be a little different than that. But I think we should probably just go ahead and get started. Anne, are you all ready and set up?
I am.
Okay. All right. Well, I am going to start my recorders here. Let's see. All right. My levels look good there, so we can go ahead and get started. So leave a little bit of a pause, and then I will go ahead. Hi, folks. Steven here. I'm on the phone with Ann from Pikapi Podcast. And in our break between the 4th and 5th generation of Pokemon side game music discussions, we've been around just a little bit, and we're going to be discussing the music and other sound aspects of Super Smash Bros. Brawl for the Nintendo Wii.
Mm-hmm.
So, in a prior discussion, we covered both the original N64 Smash Bros. And Melee for the GameCube. By this point, things had changed a little bit structurally. This was developed by Sora Limited and I guess an ad hoc team at Nintendo rather than by HAL Laboratories. Mainly that was, I think, because Masahiro Sakurai had sort of gone off on his own and was working on various projects, but keeps getting roped in to work on the next Smash Brothers. So you'll see Sora Limited, I think, on all of the subsequent Smash Brothers entries. As far as when this was released, it was released 2008, regardless of where you were. Japan was on January 31st, 2008. North America was on March 9th. And Australia and Europe got it within a day of each other. Australia was on June 26th, and Europe was on June 27th. Now, I guess in part because, now for a couple of reasons, this game was highly anticipated. Of course, Melee was the highest-selling game on the Nintendo GameCube, and just there was a ton of anticipation because of that. And because there's just been like a 6.5 year gap between us, there's just a lot of folks looking forward to what this would be. I believe it was originally announced before the Wii was released, and they sort of announced that Sakurai was working on it. But I remember they have, the Smash Brothers website. They were posting updates virtually every day in the months leading up to it because this was hotly anticipated. And what was your kind of experience?
Well, I was about in college about that time, so obviously I played Brawl. It was kind of, the classic party game that you get with all your friends together. So I don't know if I remember a lot of the lead up to it, a lot of the like the advertising and kind of the anticipation of it. But it's like the second it came out, all my friends had it. We were playing it, every get together, every spare minute between, college student things. So I remember having a lot of fun with this and it being really well received because it had, so many new stages, so many new characters, so many new things to unlock. So my memories are all very positive.
Yeah, once I finally got my hands on the game, I did play it quite a bit, including the new single-player mode, Subspace Emissary, which we may talk a little bit in our game discussion at the very end of all this. But definitely enjoyed it a lot. I did have some problems actually replaying it recently. Brawl is one of the very few Wii games that comes on a dual-layer disc, and I'm not sure if there's a problem with the disc itself or if there's something with both my Wii U and my original Wii that doesn't like to read that. But I would get partway through a play session and all of a sudden it would just lock up with an error screen and you had to turn the system off. But it was a big game in more ways than one. All right, well, as far as the musical style or stuff like that, we can't really pin that one down this. Smash 64 had about 10 to 20 different tracks in it. Melee had a couple dozen. This has well over 100 musical tracks on it. Mm-hmm. There we go. Thanks. Excuse me. Again. Okay. This has well over 100 tracks on it and marks the point where the Smash Brothers series expanded massively, both from a musical perspective but also from others. I think that after the first couple games, by this point, the franchise's stature had grown so much that it was very lucrative to be involved with. So we won't be talking about the individual people involved because there's way too many of them, nor can we really pin it down to a specific style because, as you're going to see from the selections that we made, you got a pretty good range on this. All right, well, we did each pick out 3 songs. The way we sort of did this is there's about 10 or 12 Pokemon tracks in the game. And there's also obviously a lot of other stuff. So what we did is we each picked 2 Pokemon tracks and 1 non-Pokemon track. So Anne, what were the songs you picked?
Yes, so I picked the Pokemon Center, the Dialga Palkia battle, and the Song of Storms.
Okay, so I picked Road to Viridian City from Pallet Town / Pewter City, Victory Road, and Bramble Blast. Now, if you've played more recent versions of Smash Brothers, you might also know it under the name Stickerbush Symphony. We'll get into that when we get there. But Anne, it looks like one of your choices is up first. Tell us about the Pokemon Center remix track in this game.
Yeah, so I picked this because typically the Pokemon Center theme is a very soothing, little bit of energy, but just very calming track that plays as you enter in and take care of your Pokemon. They made this sound like a battle theme, and I thought that was some very clever arranging to take this delicate, very positive do 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 and make it like da 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 da, and just there's timpani everywhere. There's an interesting section where they go heavy on the trumpets, so it kind of almost feels a little bit like Latin mariachi flavor or like ska even or something. And then the orchestra comes full in, but there's also moments where they let that original delicacy of the Pokemon Center theme come through with like a flute and a woodwind interlude, and then like a piano interlude. So like this track just goes so many different places, but it carries this grandeur that you don't usually associate with the Pokemon Center theme. And so that's why I picked it.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the more interesting arrangements of that. Now, according to my records, it was done by...
Good.
Yeah, see if I can pronounce this remotely correctly. Kentaro Ishisuga. I can't quite. That's a little hard even by Japanese standards for me. And I tried looking this. I assume it's probably a guy up, and didn't see any other credits besides this game. Any idea who this is?
Kentaro now I'm Ichitsuga. I wasn't able to find a ton on him as much as many others, unfortunately. But you're right, it is a man. He's working with the Pokemon Company. I have in here that I don't think he's a freelancer. I think he works with Nintendo in-house, but I could be wrong about that because I do see like he's had kind of a long career working in video game music.
Interesting. Maybe some of that is under an alias or a pseudonym or something like that, or a stage name or whatever, because like I said, I looked online. But going back to the instrumentation itself, actually what this reminded me of, I mean, from a hardware perspective, this is much more advanced than the N64, but it did remind me of some of the stuff they had done for the Pokemon Stadium games, and I think that was an influence here. How do you feel about that?
That makes sense. Like it definitely has kind of that, not what were we saying back with Pokemon Stadium, like almost marching band. Like it definitely has kind of that idea to it with like very strong drum beats, very strong, like full orchestra, full like band arrangements, that I think kind of fit the aura that, that Stadium was trying to give off. I feel like this executed it better and, much more high fidelity. Like they sound like live instruments, even. So, but I definitely can see where like that through line can come through.
And I guess another thing I wanted to mention, you talked about how this was a little more energetic and less soothing than the regular one. It's also a bit of an ironic use that it's being used in a like Pokemon sometimes gets flack for being a battling type game with animals, but this is literally a fighting game, and yet you're using this music that is usually associated with a basically a hospital type place.
While you're beating Mario's face, and yes.
So it's kind of an interesting choice to rework that for this, obviously a very iconic, identifiable theme from the franchise, but also, it kind of a bit of an odd choice.
Very much so.
All right, well, let's go on to my first pick. This is Road to Viridian City from Pallet Town / Pewter City. Now, remember the way the game works is that, you have Viridian City, and then there's a route above and below it and all that stuff. And it uses both the sort of Route 1 / early route theme from Red and Blue. It also uses the Viridian City theme, which technically is also used in several other cities there. Let's see. The person behind this arrangement is Shogo Sakai, who is very much a known person. He worked, I think he still works at HAL, I believe, and definitely worked on the prior Smash Brothers games. So not a huge surprise there. I do kind of wonder how they allocate some of this. Some of this they sought people out. Some of it, I'm sure, was first come, first served with remixing or rearranging certain songs. Mm. But as far as this particular one, there's two very distinct sections. There's a march section, which is based on the root theme, and then there's a harpsichord section, which is the Viridian City game theme in there. And I kind of wonder, structurally what they're going for. But Anne, first I want to give you, what were your sort of first impressions on this?
Well, this is another track that goes a lot of different places because it starts off very like, as you say, march, dun, 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 and then it almost sounds like a tin whistle or a piccolo or something with playing the little do-do-do theme. It's like, it feels very like festival or carnival almost even, but then like it has a moment where it like, I think that's an electric guitar that comes in and it's just kind of just has a very different feel to it. Then later you get, like you say, a harpsichord. So it's just, again, a totally different feel with a slightly different melody, obviously, because it's the Viridian City theme. So yeah, like this is just a track it's doing a lot. It's going a lot of different places, but none of it feels uncoordinated. Like, they're very disparate musical ideas that all bleed into each other in a seamless way that you just kind of go along on the journey and you never feel like a jarring switch of musical style or instrument.
Yeah, structurally it seems like there's a journey aspect to it, and I kind of wanted to expand on that and say that you got the march, which is sort of like honestly kind of leaving your hometown there if you're coming from Pallet Town, and we all know like in the first episode how there were some of those crowds to send off some of the trainers on their journey, and then you get to the harpsichord part, which I guess I do kind of wonder, is that supposed to be sort of a pastoral grasslands theme? But it's the city theme, so is it supposed to be like a decadent city? I do kind of wonder what their exact objective. I mean, from a strictly musical standpoint, it definitely works. I was just kind of curious if you had any thoughts.
Well, I mean, the Pokemon world, especially as we encounter it in the anime, but a little bit in the games too, like you've got your Saffron and your Celadon cities with skyscrapers. And then you've also got little podunk Japanese town out of nowhere. Like that seems to be still living in the Bronze Age sometimes. So I don't know, maybe they're trying to find a union between that. It's like we're on the road to Viridian City, but we also might pass through a farm that is using practices from the 1800s.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, when they arranged this, they definitely had a sort of going from place to place motif in there. But and I don't think it's a bad track at all. But I just kind of wanted to point that out there.
Yeah, it's definitely a choice to have, again, to kind of it. I won't say it doesn't have a through line. Like I say, everything feels like it connects and bleeds into each other. But like they're choosing some very distinct, different ideas with each section of this song.
All right, well, let's go on to Anne's second pick. This is the Dialga Palkia battle at Spear Pillar. Of course, between Melee and Brawl, there were two generations of Pokemon, the third and the fourth generation. This is obviously from the Diamond and Pearl games. And what kind of grabbed your attention here?
Yeah, so I was first grabbed by the track itself, which, like, the first instrument I really noticed was like a wind sort of synth pad, which kind of charmed me a little because it sounded almost identical to one that I make a lot of use of in GarageBand. I'm sure it was a lot more high class and effective than the programs I use, but like I just found that very charming. Is it just kind of had this wind feature and this nature feature, and then like it kind of felt like we were going a little bit into the Twilight Zone, like just this very, very small intervals playing, and piano and the timpani going hard, a little bit of the variation on the standard battle theme, but it is heavy and it's full of bass and drums, and compared to the Pokemon Center theme, like very serious. So I found that track to just be a lot of fun, and it very much felt like if we're not going to have a disruption of time and space, that at least we're going to have like a very meaningful type of boss battle.
Yeah, definitely a track that you would expect would translate well to a fighting game like this. What can you tell us about
Takahiro Nishi?
Yeah.
Sorry.
What can you tell us about Takahiro Nishi, the person who arranged this version?
Yeah, so he works for Game Arts, or at least he was at the time of all my notes. He's kind of grown up with a lot of musical interests. Like he says he listened to a lot of overseas music like Elvis Presley and the Beatles. Over time taught himself the electric organ, the acoustic guitar, joined a band in school, and went to university and then worked for a music company right out, and then started just kind of moving his way up through the music industry, kind of more on the arranging side and sound producer. And that's where he started his career with Game Arts. He's worked a lot on, let's see, he's actually like worked a lot on Kid Icarus Uprising. And I'm kind of surprised that he doesn't have any arrangement credits for that track on Brawl that I can tell. But he's also got arrangement credits for one of the Pikmin tracks, Metal Gear, and he's just kind of worked a lot through Nintendo games, and yeah, just kind of had his fingers in a lot of pots being an arranger, because a lot of people will compose a lot of different things for music, for games and things, but when you arrange it for something like Brawl, you get to draw from a lot of different places. So he's gotten to have a very interesting career working with a lot of different styles.
Yeah, some folks pinpoint this as sort of the re-emergence of Kid Icarus in Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Of course, Uprising came out in the 3DS a bit later, but also a Sakurai game in that regard. So definitely seems to have a thing for that character. So I mean, it's
so
not surprising. I mean, it's not surprising for me that they would pick this track. Obviously, it's still quite important. Obviously, a little over a year ago in late 2021, we had the Diamond and Pearl remakes, and Spear Pillar shows up yet again in Legends Arceus. We actually get to see how it got to be the way it is there. So definitely a good choice, both musically and also as an important location in the series. Any other thoughts on this track?
I again, just that it's like got a very unique quality to it. Like I said, that makes me feel like I'm in the Twilight Zone. I'm kind of interested in picking it apart more to kind of see like, what is it that gives me that feeling? Is it the wind synth? Is it the very small, like, distance between the intervals? Is it the instrumentation itself and how everything is like a very low frequency bass sound? I don't know, but I do find this track very deliberately composed.
Yeah, the wind noise and a lot of the instruments. I agree with you with the low end is definitely very prominent on this. Well, to be honest, sorry. Although, if you really want a track that really goes out there, I think my next pick here, Victory Road, is a pretty good candidate. I'm not going to say it's technically my favorite track, but it definitely stood out. It was arranged by Motoi Sakuraba, who is a very well-known video game composer and has worked on many games to this day. Kind of best known for his work first of all, in the Mario sports games, so like the golf and tennis games, he's worked a lot on those, as well as the Tales series, Tales. So Tales of Symphonia and other associated games in that series. And, having heard some of his other work, not so much in the Mario sports games, which tend to be more laid back, but some of his work in, various RPGs and stuff like that, I would buy that this is some of his work there. It's Victory Road, obviously, there's one of those in almost every game, although I guess in Scarlet and Violet it is a quest and not an actual physical place so much. But in the earlier games, this is always that route you go through to get to the Pokemon League after you've gotten all the badges. And some places go very much for the empty, mysterious cave vibe, but this is actually from Ruby and Sapphire, which uses, I actually think, kind of a swashbuckling motif for it, and that kind of translates over here. And talked a lot about the original track. What were some of your impressions of this remake of it?
I feel like it was covered by Dragon Force or something. Like I love the guitars. Like it just feels it's as close to metal as it can get without actually becoming a metal track. Just like there's just this sweeping quality to it, and like again, very electric, very heavy. Maybe not necessarily heavy in the drum sense, but like the guitars are going, and there's this swag to it. Like if they went harder on the drums, I could easily see a metal band like covering the song in this way. There's something just very modern and wild about it that I like.
Yeah, they definitely, Sakuraba definitely went to town on this arrangement. That's one of the reasons I picked it. I'm not sure, this might have been, especially back then, too out there for me to use on the station, although I'm fairly certain I had a recording of it. I'm not sure. But in any case, wild guitar, electric piano, seems like there's some howling in there. I can totally see, assuming that he picked this track out himself to work on, I can totally see what might have attracted him to it. So any other thoughts? I think you covered it pretty well, Anne, but anything you want to add on top of all that?
No, not really. If you bring up a swashbuckling quality to it, like definitely that energy feeds into it, even if the genre has completely changed.
All right, well, let's see. How do I want to transition there? I got to think about that for just a second. All right, well, believe it or not, that was one of my picks. And let's go to your non-Pokemon pick. This is Song of Storms, which, of course, is originally from Ocarina of Time from the Zelda series. Very popular track, but what caught your attention in this particular arrangement?
Well, I was always going to pick this track just because my old roommate, shout out to Hallie, is kind of obsessed with the Song of Storms, and all my friends have kind of like, I'm in the Zelda fandom because they are so deeply in it. And she loves the Song of Storms to the point where, like, at one point she was writing lyrics for it and trying to, like, create her own variation on it, and like, had a bard D&D Zora character and was learning this song on the ocarina. Like, it's so, like, has a lot of, like, personal love for me. But I love the instrumentation in this track. Like, it's very sweet and soft, but also kind of not unsettling, I guess, but like it has a weight to it, like an unease to it, maybe. Like there's these synth bells, there's like a flute or an ocarina. There's also moments where it sounds like a sea shanty. So like it's very folky in a way that kind of captures a lot of the original Ocarina of Time feel. It's kind of captures the depth of the Zelda world and the mysteriousness, and like it's fun and exciting and very Renaissance festival sometimes, but it is also deep and wild and full of magic. So there's a lot going on in this track that I find just very beautiful.
And can you tell us anything about Tsukasa Masuko, who did this arrangement. I did notice, well, this was more of a, this is not to belittle his work. He did get stuck apparently doing some sound programming work for the rather infamously mediocre Quest 64 back in the 90s, but he's also worked on some of the Mana games. What can you tell us about this individual?
Not like not much beyond like his general autobiography. I actually think I have it like it's Tsukasa Tetsuto, right? Or am I getting that wrong?
Let's double check
Let's
on this.
pause for a second.
So conveniently, this will probably be an outtake, but conveniently, all the music in this game, I told you I had problems playing in. Let me put down. So let's see. This is the Zelda section. All the music from Brawl is in most, the Wii U and the Switch versions of this. So let's see. It's possible there's a typo in it.
No, if there's a typo, I'm sure it's on my end because it didn't yield a lot, so I'm sure
Looks
I'm
like
wrong.
I did put down the wrong name in my notes. I'm not sure. Was I looking at... Where did I get that name from? I was looking at the songs right above and below it, and... yeah, so it is... Let me correct my notes here. So luckily, yeah, I have the Smash Ultimate open right here, and I have the correct name in it. So
Tsukasa Masuko, and I wrote Tetsu. Okay. That might have something to do with it for me.
I'm looking at the wrong track here. You're right. I did have the... I'm sorry.
No, I'm sure you're right.
I am. I hadn't switched the song, so it was still displaying the person from the Dialga Palkia Battle at Spear Pillar or something like that. So let's see here. So yes, it is Tsukasa Masuko. So let's rewind. Let me turn my Switch back into sleep mode now that we've double-checked our research. All right, well, why don't we start that question over? And we'll do that there. Okay, well, before we get too much further, I'd like to... let's see. Sorry. And what can you... Let's see. This angle of my computer here is just off enough that it makes it hard to read. Tsukasa Masuko. And what can you tell us about Tsukasa Masuko, the person who arranged this track?
Yeah, so I don't have a ton on him, mostly just his autobiography. But I do know that he does have an alias, Mako, which makes a lot more sense now that I've got his name right. And he's known a lot for his work with Atlas, music and sound production company. He served as a composer, a sound designer, and a programmer. Is kind of like, I have a lot of notes here that he's kind of been taken over in a way by Hirohiko Takayama, who's kind of moved to Atlas, and he's kind of moving into his retirement years. But he's known for the Shin Megami Tensei series, some work with Karate Kid, Quirk, Biosenshidan, and obviously a little bit of Zelda, and a lot of arrangement for Brawl.
Yeah, actually, I found some credits from that I found Sorry. Yeah, there were some credits that I found kind of interesting. He's worked on a couple of the Mana series games, and actually he had, I guess, quote-unquote, misfortune of doing sound programming for the thoroughly mediocre Quest 64 back on the N64, the game that had to live up to Final Fantasy VII for the N6, But... I don't think that's necessarily, it's like I said, thoroughly mediocre Quest 64. But going back to the song, you mentioned sort of the swirling quality. I think it might have been a word you used. I mean, certainly being a song of storms, you can talk about stuff like weather patterns and whirlpools and, maybe even a hurricane, stuff like that. I did notice that there's at least one or two other of the Ocarina songs from Ocarina of Time in there. I forget exactly which one it is, but I think it's towards the end there. Did you catch that, or did I misidentify it, or?
I may not be the one to ask. You have a much better ear for picking out motifs than I do. So I'm going to trust you on that. And like I said, I'm in the fandom because people I know are in the fandom, less because I can recognize songs at will. So I think you're probably right, but I will trust you on this one.
All right. Well, why don't we go on to my non-Pokemon pick? This is Bramble Blast, also known, I think the more proper title for this track is Stickerbush Symphony. It's originally from Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Kong Quest. And, this was a fairly well-respected and well-known song prior to this. It certainly was considered to be one of the best tracks in a very good soundtrack, Donkey Kong Country 2. But before we go into this, I think that this rearrangement really kind of shot it into the stratosphere. It was done by Michiro Naruke, who is, I guess, best known for Wild Arms and Valis 3, the Wild Arms series, I should say. And, boy, I remember when I first heard this, I believe it was playing through the single-player Subspace Emissary mode. You run into it at a certain point. And it just kind of, I don't know if blew my mind, might be overselling it just a little, despite how much I love this. But it really transformed the song, which was already very good, into something like amazingly memorable. It's almost as if someone took made a new arrangement of like the Zelda, not the main theme, but maybe like the dungeon theme from the first game, and it just blew everybody away. That's kind of what this would be like. Or maybe it's closer to what was done with the temple theme from Zelda 2 when that got brought into Melee. Mm-hmm. And what are your kind of thoughts?
As you say, like wasn't familiar with this track before we kind of did this project, but blew my mind is a way to put it. Like it almost feels like in some ways it has the energy of a dance track. In some ways, there's this guitar noodling that's so creative, like. It feels like an improvisation, not, something that would have been very, calculated or pre-existing. And then there's like this violin or fiddle that goes in, and it's like, oh my goodness, I feel like I'm getting emotional. Like there's so much creativity coming out of this track, and it just really kind of, it's not a track I expected to find on this soundtrack, to be honest. And it's very beautiful.
Yeah, let's see. I don't want to follow that, but yeah, all those instruments really combine into something. I mean, the only thing I could think, like some of them are definitely synth, and I think maybe if you got the right, I don't know, like replacing them with like real instruments, if you did like a studio performance, might make it even more impressive, but I'm not sure if you could recapture everything in here. Just like regardless, this is a fantastic arrangement. It is, by the way, this specific track is one I've used on my radio show, my pre-recorded radio show here in Madison from 8 to 64. I used this in a recent-ish episode. Finally got around to it. But absolutely amazing. And like I said, took an existing, decently well-known song and just did some amazing things with it. And, when you talk to people about, like I said, Stickerbush Symphony, I think this, in some ways, might be more popular than the original version, despite the original version's relative popularity. I don't know, have you heard, like, Stickerbush Symphony / Bramble Blast referred to outside of context? What's your sort of feeling in that area?
Well, like I said, this is not a track I'm familiar with. I don't think I've heard a lot of people talking about it. I don't think I'd know it. In any other context, I don't have any nostalgic memories of it, although I'm sure I've heard it. But this is amazing. I really love this. So I can see how the original material must be a great track, but this has clearly taken it to another place. But yeah.
Yeah, so good on you, Michiko. You really took something, you somehow made a diamond into a better diamond. I'm not sure, but yeah. All right, well, like I said, there's over 100 tracks in this game. No way we could really cover all, or even a significant fraction. It's sort of the same thing with sort of the Mystery Dungeon games, who I think those folks, at least some of them, also worked on some of the stuff for this game as well. But we do need to talk about a few other things. One of those is the announcer. We've got yet another new announcer. It is Pat Cashman, who I thought was still the announcer in the more recent games, but apparently that's not the case. They have a different one for 3DS and Wii U, and then for Ultimate, I might use the same one as the Smash 4, but I'm not entirely sure. But this guy has kind of an interesting history. First of all, if he sounds familiar, well, you might have seen some old episodes of Bill Nye the Science Guy, because this guy is apparently from... he grew up in Oregon, but did most of his work in the Seattle area and worked as the announcer on that show, which I'm sure gives some folks some interesting dubbing opportunities with the voice samples from this game. As usual, that means he also voices the hand characters, Master Hand and Crazy Hand. They usually give that the announcer voice. I don't know. I'm not sure I have too much else. I think he does a fine job in line with some of the other folks who have done that. I don't know, Anne, what are your thoughts on the announcer in this one?
I usually don't pay a ton of attention, but like there is a quality to him that is like not campy necessarily, but like just grand enough, just wild enough, like just too big enough, but not like so much that it takes you out of it. And I think there's Pat Cashman being like a comedian, among other things in his career, like maybe like helps him to kind of walk that line of like he can do the big comic book announcer voice, but in a way that sounds like it still fits in the world. It's not so much that it feels cheesy, but it's not so serious that it takes you out of the fact that you're playing with Mario. And so I don't know. I think he walks a very good line.
Yeah, certainly gets the job done, and I would call it a good job. I'm not sure I have a super preference for any of the announcers or then or now, so I'm not sure I can comment on that, but it is something we definitely have to put in there. And then I want to go back. I want to insert. We got a comment in the chat. I want to insert that back into our Bramble Blast company. Yeah. Sticker Bush Symphony definitely has a legacy. And one of our people in our chat room, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce this, but BOKC_Ellis said that it's their favorite song in the game and almost cried once when hearing it. Now, it is that beautiful. Like I said, it's amazing what they were able to do with that track. So,
gosh, yeah, like you get into the mood with the guitar noodling, but once that violin comes in, you're just like, oh my. I'm glad other people love it too.
Okay, then we can go back to, we're going to do our sort of overall wrap-up. We kind of did a little bit of it, but it's sort of just an admission that, all right, let's see here. Move my notes up a little bit. So sorry about that, folks. Sometimes I do try to get viewer comments from the chat in there, just because it obviously is a nice thing to do, and also I think it enhances the show in various ways. All right.
Now, live streaming is a skill I do not have. Like, it just feels like I'm juggling so many screens. But we're really happy that you're all there.
Yeah. As far as other sounds in the game, what do you think? Any thoughts on the character voices, sound effects, anything like that?
I mean, they're all very good. Like, they sound like themselves. They sound like they're in pain. I've never been disappointed by any of them flying off the screen in a blaze of fiery glory. I think it's just very well produced sound wise. Like the sounds of everybody's punches and special attacks and everything is just, it feels like they put all the attention in all the right places.
That sounds about right. I think things sound pretty good overall. Obviously, our big deal here was the music, but the sound effects and character voices, Pokemon or otherwise, seem to do pretty well there. There is some good attention to detail, especially as the series moves on, where they'll hear slightly different variations and things of that nature. But looking at the whole sound package of this game, I mean, as I said earlier, we really can't do this justice. There's just too much material here. And we've only covered a fraction of it. I mean, yes, Smash 64, Melee, they were good sound-wise in their time stuff, but this just, you go from a lake to like an ocean almost in terms of the scope here. And I think while I don't necessarily love every track in there, really like a lot of them, and obviously a lot of heart and soul went into this from the part of the arrangers and so on. From the part of the arrangers who worked on it. And what are your sort of overall thoughts on the sound of this game?
I would agree with everything you just said. Like, it's taken a level not only from previous Smash games, but like to other games we've talked about on this series. Like, the second I started listening to tracks of this, I was like, oh, what a difference, just in the sound quality, in like, they're all arrangements of pre-existing tracks mostly, but such creativity in those arrangements, and like in some of these tracks, like a real loving twist on them. Like, somebody really loves the Bramble track. Somebody loves heavy metal, and somebody really had a take on the Song of Storms and went with it. So I'm kind of just amazed by all the work that everybody put into this.
Yeah, you can tell by this point that Smash Brothers had become sort of a destination or a desirable gig for, musicians and also characters. We'll talk a little bit about some of the new characters in our post discussion. But it just, it was the game series you wanted to have a chance to work on, pretty much. All right, well, like I said, we'll have a game discussion a bit later. But we do have some feedback to go over, so let me go ahead and boot that up. Should just take a second.
Let's do that. But yes, stay tuned to find out who is our go-to Smash Brawl character. If you couldn't guess. Or put in the chat your favorite Smash Brawl character, like, rep your people.
All right, well, like we said, way more Smash Brothers Brawl stuff than we could ever fit into a discussion here, but if you have anything you thought we really missed, you can always give us a comment, either on these videos, or you can drop us an email, pokepress@gmail.com, or on social media @pokepress on Twitter. But I do have some prior stuff that I wanted to go over in our feedback section here. First off, let's see, a few weeks before we recorded this, I put up a short video. Shorts are ostensibly they're YouTube's attempt to compete with TikTok, but I do find I get pretty good responses on these relative to some of my regular videos, so I think YouTube really just wants more of these or promotes them harder or something like that. In any case, this one is called Parts of Mewtwo Strikes Back Are Sharper Than Others. Here's why. So this is they have to be under a minute. This is a brief explainer video that explains that the original Japanese 98 version was all shot on 16mm film. But when they brought it over, they redid some stuff in 35mm, which looks sharper. So sort of the gist of this is that I did some testing using a deblurring AI model that I had, and asked folks, hey, does that sound any better? And asked folks, does that look any better to you? I don't want to go into the whole AI stuff. If you look through some of the notes I had on, I go into the details about how this isn't the best necessary way to do it. This is more of a proof of concept. But in any case, DDO33 put in, personally, I didn't see much difference with the AI sharpness. I have the Blu-ray, but to be honest, I never questioned the blur. So yeah, this is something I kind of knew back when I originally saw it about the 16/35 switch that they did in there. I don't know, Anne, kind of a lot of stuff in there. Did you want to comment on some of this? Sorry.
Well, no. Well, first I will point out a lot of this is over my head. This is not where I live. This is not my class. But I have to agree with DDDO33. Like, for my part, I didn't see a ton of difference. Like, I've definitely noticed on a lot of movies, Mewtwo Strikes Back included kind of older animation and how it looks on sharper televisions, on Blu-ray players. I don't believe I have the Blu-ray of this movie, though. I think I still have its original release. But like there is definitely a difference. Why that difference occurs, the difference between 16 millimeter to 35 millimeter, as I said, is a bit over my head. I do think it's interesting, but I am afraid I don't understand a lot of
it. That's okay. I mean, the millimeters just means how big the film was that they were using it for. And 16 millimeter was commonly used like pre-high definition and even some into high definition for television production.
Right, which would
35 was more common for big feature films. But yeah, so the enhanced version of Mewtwo Strikes Back, by which I mean the 99 dub and also a version that was republished in Japan, not the CGI version, is a bit of an odd mishmash there. But obviously having, worked on some of this AI upscaling, which I think is kind of undersold lately, it's gotten sort of missed with some of the other AI projects going on, but I think this is one that's definitely commercially viable in various ways. But I can certainly see the difference there. It does look sharper. Now, with the ones where I really turned up the de-blurring, one problem is it kind of brings out the film grain more, almost as if the film was shot on a lower or a higher ISO of film, which is a bit odd. But yeah, so it's one of our more technical discussions, and I'm sure a bit lost on our podcast audience, but I'll toss a link in the episode description and you can take a look for yourself.
Yes, famously visual medium podcasting. But it is interesting to think that technology can do a lot to, I don't know, tinker with or restore old animation, even as it kind of transitions from one form to another or whatever. Like I said, it's all a bit over my head, but that it is very interesting that these kinds of things can be done.
Yeah, one thing I want to try next is to see if I can use it to fix the fourth and fifth movie transfers, which have some issues. The fourth movie, the Celebi movie, has a somewhat soft transfer when that was brought over to Blu-ray, and then movie 5 has the infamous blue tint, which this would be a great use for this type of technology if it's something that you can save you the trouble of doing a new transfer from scratch from the original film source. So, yeah. But basically what you need to know is the difference between 16 and 35 millimeter, and there's other sizes too, 8 millimeters, 70 millimeter IMAX. Basically, the more millimeters you have, it's like having a digital camera with more megapixels is sort of the way of doing it, although film grain and pixels aren't really the same thing. They have a similar effect when you have more of them. All right, so this is one I did, about 4.5 years ago. And I apologize for the folks who are watching this live. My hair is not very good in this thumbnail that you're seeing, so maybe avert your gaze. Sorry if it's too late. That was back when I had mutton chops and stuff like that. So even though I definitely look younger, I'm not sure I look better. In any case, though. So this is, does Octopath Traveler have better Shinji Miyazaki music? So this is actually kind of, I guess, good timing. As we're recording this, the second Octopath Traveler game is about to come out the month after we're recording this in February of 2023. And it does, in fact, have the same composer behind it. But we got a comment from Gordy, who is a big fan of Shinji Miyazaki, but kind of admits, and this is sort of my criticism too, even though I'm less of a fan of his work, is that the newer stuff that Shinji has put in is a bit like resting on his laurels. But he did suggest as an alternative, the person behind, I don't know, let's see, that there's a composer called Konich, I'm not sure exactly who that is, but who worked on the Pokemon Twilight Wings web series. This was a bunch of animated shorts that were done to promote Legends Arceus in 2022, and thought that might be a good one. And I've had my own ideas too. I'd love to see, I'm sure that Tsukasa Tawada is working on whatever the next thing Genius Minority puts out is, after Cafe Remix. But if he has some time, I'd love to have him work on the TV show or the movies. I'm let's see, how do I want to say this? But I guess I'm probably also a little more accepting of Ed Goldfarb's work. He's done some better stuff when he's been allowed to use these things, but I don't think his stuff when he's been allowed to use game music in his arrangements. But I think that the stuff he's done for the TV show is and movies where he's worked on a replacement dub score has been at least a lateral move. So, but I know he also has his stern critics. So we talked a little bit about that. Gordy also mentioned that he's frustrated that like the newer Pokemon games have not had any sort of soundtrack releases. Like the last one I believe is Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, and that's from 2018. And so we're still waiting for Sword and Shield and Legends Arceus, Brilliant Diamond, Shining Pearl. Say nothing of I think there might have actually been a limited CD/vinyl release for the Mystery Dungeon remake. I think I saw that on eBay for much more than I was willing to pay. But as far as all the games they've released since then, say nothing of I think I've heard that Pokemon Masters is working on some sort of release, which I hope they are, given the amazing quality of the soundtrack in that game. But yeah, so. Yeah, the only Scarlet and Violet track you can really get commercially is Celestial. So not to hate on Ed Sheeran or anything. There's plenty of other people on the internet who can do that. But yeah, so that's been annoying. I don't know, Anne. I'm sorry. I really should have given this back to you a little bit sooner. But any thoughts on anything I just spat out there?
Well, I feel like we have almost talked to death. Our opinions and slightly tepid to disillusionment with some of Shinji Miyazaki's later Pokemon music. I am all for giving the reins to, or at least adding another chef to the kitchen for future movies and anime. And I agree. Like Pokemon Twilight Wings, there were some new creative ideas in there from Konishi. I am all for tossing him in the mix. And kind of just getting some new blood in with the old guard and shaking things up a little. And as always, the situation with Pokemon music and releasing is a wild, unknown frontier where we just do not know what legal things are happening and why. So.
Yeah, so it's kind of just weird. Apparently the Twilight Wings soundtrack, the score was actually released as a pack-in bonus for something in the Pokemon Center Japan, and someone did try and sell it on eBay for more money than I would probably pay for it. Again, not nearly as crazy as what they did for the listing I saw for the Mystery Dungeon stuff, but yeah, I said, I don't. Go ahead.
I was going to say, Gordy makes a good point. If they're going to pass out a CD to people, they could just as easily put the music on iTunes. When I have released music, it is a heck of a lot easier to get the licensing rights to just digitally distribute it than it is to physically distribute anything. So it's kind of they got the rights to physically distribute this, but couldn't or wouldn't put it on a digital. So I don't know what's happening. I don't know their contracts, but it strikes me as odd that they got those rights, but not these ones. It's very strange to me, but who knows?
Yeah, I mean, there's been some laws passed. I know we had the Music Modernization Act here in the U.S. a few years ago that tried to smooth over some of the licensing stuff to make that easier. But let's see, what was I did have another thing I wanted to say. Yeah, so I can only assume there's some sort of weird contractual hurdle in all of this. Considering that they haven't even released Pokemon soundtracks for the new games in Japan, so it's not as if they're not putting them out in the West,
right?
With a few exceptions, like we mentioned earlier, but it's that the main series games aren't getting there. I thought with Sword and Shield, maybe they're waiting for the DLC to come out, but even after that, and then a month or two later, it's still nothing. So it's okay, All right. Well, that's still a mystery to us. But what's not a mystery to us, we're going to start doing discussions of Gen 5 side games. It did take me a little bit of digging because it's kind of gets to be a little bit of a mess of at least like 3 different systems for the Gen 5 side games. But from what I can tell, the first one to be released in North America is Pokemon Rumble Blast. So this is the second of the Pokemon Rumble games, and this was a full price like retail game that came out in 2011. It looks like. Now, a lot of the music here is actually inherited from like the WiiWare Pokemon Rumble game. We're going to have to take a look and see how much new music there is and if this is going to be a full discussion or if we're going to split the episode somehow. But either way, I certainly look forward to talking about this one. It's obviously not quite on the Brawl scale, but it's definitely worth talking about. And I don't know if did you have a chance to pick up this version of the Rumble series?
I have actually. I think I used to own it. In fact, I don't believe I do anymore, but I'll check my bin of of used game cartridges and see if it's still there. See if I can get a refresher.
All right. Well, until then, Anne, thank you very much for being on.
Thank you.
This has been Stephen Reich. All right, folks. Thanks. All right. So we're going to take a quick minute or two break. I want to get some more water because I'm thirsty. But we are going to talk about Smash Brothers, the game. I think we made relatively decent time despite some of our fumbles in there. This is going to be, I figure this would be a little bit of a longer episode because we could spend an hour talking about the game itself or at least a good solid 30 minutes. I'm going to try and keep it shorter than that. We got some good comments in there from DDD033 who had to duck in and out because of the whole, apparently he does work on weekends, which bless you. But he appreciated my explanation of like I said, the millimeter thing. Like I said, the more millimeters your film has, effectively it has a higher resolution. It's not quite the same as megapixels, but it has a similar effect. Because you have, there's some other factors like the ISO of the film and the grain quality and stuff like that. But generally, that's why stuff like like stuff that was not IMAX but bigger than 35 millimeter, like Lawrence of Arabia. That's why that looks so clean when you watch it on there. Is because the grain, they used 70 or 65 millimeter film for that, and thus the grain was very small there. So it looks great on your 1080p, but even better like in 4K because it's got so much information there. So I'll be right back.
That's really interesting. Like again, it's all a bit over my head, but I have heard people talking about that before. I think I was actually just watching the Fellowship of the Ring commentary, and they were mentioning something about shooting the ring wraiths on a different millimeter film than a lot of the other stuff, and that's why they kind of look like they're gliding. They kind of had this very otherworldly movement to them because they're shot on a different film rate. I don't know if this is the same thing, but this sounds like it could be the same thing, and that is fascinating, especially with Lawrence of Arabia, that something that was shot such a long time ago, because of how it was shot, can look so crisp and clean today when I'm still seeing a difference with a lot of older movies and that were shot or animated, putting them up on higher technology. You can kind of see the flaws, lovingly so sometimes, but no, it's all very interesting, and I wish I understood it a little better, but as I say, that is not my class. So,
well, if you want to learn more about like film stock and stuff like that and how things were filmed in the old days, there's plenty of videos on YouTube that sort of explain all the different film types and stuff like that. But yeah, as you go, I mean, the grains of film aren't really any smaller there, but just because the size of the film, you have, like I said, you have effectively, it's sort of kind of, but not really analogous to having more megapixels on your sensor on your camera. It's not quite the same thing, but they're not completely dissimilar either.
Yeah, I can definitely see how it would make a difference in how we visually perceive the final product, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, 35 millimeter film is still used. Like, for example, actually, a lot of the live action, actors in Detective Pikachu were shot using film cameras rather than digital ones. In case you're curious about that. I remember reading that a lot of it was done there. Of course, movies today are so digital; they're all processed digitally to do all the special effects and stuff like that. So it's perhaps somewhat of a moot point, but you still get a little bit of a different look. Although that there is software that simulates that. And just going back to the whole millimeter thing, I think with the AI, like the best you could do would be to put make a model based on 16 millimeter versions of 35 millimeter film, or 35 millimeter versions of 70 millimeter film, or stuff like that, and you could create a model that would still not be quite as good as if it was originally shot at that higher resolution, but come pretty close to replicating it, and that might be very interesting.
Yeah.
But in any case, let's talk about Smash Brothers. So we'll leave a little bit of pause. Let me punch my notes back up. Let's talk about Smash Brothers Brawl, the game. All right. I only have a few notes here, but we'll decide how long we want to talk about that. There's a couple of things I definitely want to cover. All right. Well, let's talk about Super Smash Brothers Brawl, the game, and quite a game it was, both in terms of sales and reputation and opinions. Most people very much liked it. There were certainly some folks who weren't as happy with it, but let's start off with what I consider to be the big new mechanic in this game, which is the final smash. So each character has a sort of finishing move, I guess you could call it. Although basically what it does is you have some sort of mega powerful move that you have to grab from like a sphere that appears, and you have to be the first person to like break it open and then use it. There's actually some evidence they wanted to do this earlier in the series, as far back as the original Smash Brothers on the N64, and just didn't have time to implement it, based on some voice clips that are there. But Anne, what did you sort of think of this mechanic?
Well, I have never once ever successfully gotten that sphere. People have tried to explain it to me. I've never figured it out. I've never gotten it done ever, even by accident. But like, I do think it's a cool mechanic, and it has utterly wasted me many a time. But I cannot get it. We've established on this podcast I am not good at video games. I just like video games.
Well, if you want to give it a shot, and you do get a copy of this game, if you go into the event battles, which are back from Melee, there is a event battle that gives you a chance to test out the Landmaster one that Fox McCloud has relatively easily. So if you at least want to practice that, it doesn't even make you break open the thing; you just have it automatically. So that's what's there. Like I said, they wanted to put it in earlier based on some voice samples from Ness and Pikachu in the original game that are left over. That seems to suggest some sort of big move there. So they finally got around to it in this one. Let's talk about some of the new characters. First off, let me just think for a second. I know there's at least one. Are there two new Pokemon characters? There's Lucario, and then I'm trying to think if there's a different one. No, I think Lucario might. So, okay. So let's talk about some of the new characters. First off, on the Pokemon front, we lost Mewtwo and Pichu, but we got Lucario, which, has not exactly the same moveset as Mewtwo, but has some similarities. But I think the big one there is that the more damage it takes, the more powerful it gets. I mean, obviously, if they're going to choose a super popular Pokemon from Gen 4, Lucario is a pretty good choice.
And if I'm correct about this, this was not, I think, because this was 2008, I was in Japan at this point, the Lucario and the Mystery of Mew movie was still going strong. I could still buy that in a grocery store. So, I can see how that guy was real popular and a real must-have character for this one.
Yeah, I mean, for 4th gen, most popular new Pokemon, I think it's pretty much either Lucario or Darkrai. And Darkrai, I'm sure they could make a fighter out of it. And I think it appears from the Pokeballs, at least. I don't know if it's in this game or later ones, but you kind of get the idea there. But definitely a good choice as far as characters there. I mean, pretty much, I don't know not where I wanted to go with exactly with that. I want to work in another viewer comment in regards to the Final Smash. Yeah, and one of our let's see, yeah, and actually the Final Smash does have one interesting interaction with one of the characters. DD033 was very excited to be able to play as Zero Suit Samus, and Samus has that kind of weird interaction with the Final Smash where she switches between her two forms when you use the Final Smash. So she'll switch from regular to zero or zero and back whenever you use the Final Smash there. They didn't do that again, I don't think, for some of the other ones. They kept them as separate characters, I think. But that was kind of an interesting use of that mechanic.
Yeah, that's way cool.
All right, going to new characters. Let's see, I swear, was there was there a new Pokemon character specifically besides Luca? I don't. Oh, the Pokemon trainer. Duh. That's why it kind of
right. Because you can choose to be the Pokemon trainer and get Charmander, Bulbasaur, Squirtle. Yeah. Or
well, it's Charizard, Ivysaur, Squirtle. So 1 second. So let me go ahead there. Yeah, and then the other new Pokemon character is Pokemon Trainer, which has a Charizard, an Ivysaur, and a Squirtle. Now, they do sort of share a health bar and stuff like that, but you can swap between them, which is a very interesting mechanic. Evidence that they wanted to also do something with like Plusle and Minun, but this is what we actually got in the game. Any thoughts on that character?
I remember feeling a little disappointed. Like, you can still fight as Pikachu, but I always thought the Pokemon Trainer character and getting to call out your Pokemon like felt a little bland, a little complicated, because you can't choose which Pokemon you want when. Like, I would rather be a Pokemon or I would rather be Ash. And I always felt a little disappointed by the Pokemon Trainer, but I liked the idea. I never chose it, but I liked the potential, I suppose, but I was a little disappointed by the execution.
Yeah, I don't know that I ended up using that character that much. I've talked to a few people who have talked about either playing as Pokemon Trainer in the games where it exists, or playing against it and what that's kind of like. And they've had some, I don't know if mixed is the right way to put it, but it's interesting, even if it may not be it's certainly not for everybody, which I guess no Smash character is.
That's true.
But the other new characters we should definitely mention is this is the first Smash Brothers game with non-Nintendo franchise characters. So this kind of dates back to Melee, because actually partway through Melee's development, I think someone from Sega and also someone from Konami really wanted to have Sonic, because Sega had just gone third party, and then also Solid Snake from the Metal Gear series in there, and it was just too late to integrate either of them into the game. And back then you couldn't do DLC unless maybe you were on Xbox and stuff like that, so they couldn't do that. But this time around, we got Sonic the Hedgehog and we got Snake, and I think those are the two. We get more in the later games, but that is really interesting. After all those years, of in the 90s, particularly of the Sonic and Sega versus Nintendo and Mario rivalry. I think that the Olympics games also started coming out around this time between Mario and Sonic. It was seeing them sort of bury the hatchets, sort of. They still get to fight each other. But to see that in a game like that, and actually there was a infamous gaming magazine April Fool's Day joke regarding Sonic and Melee, which obviously was fake. So finally having all that here was kind of nice. What was that like? Was that like a bit of a culture shock thing, or how did you feel about it, Anne?
Okay, so like me personally, I didn't care. I do have a friend in my life who like Sonic versus the Mario franchise is like a thing. Like, we once did a group Halloween costume where like all of my girlfriends, we were Rosalina, Peach, and Daisy, and like we're trying to get him to go as Mario or Bowser. and like he absolutely refused to be Mario because he's like, my loyalty is to Sonic. And so it's I understand for some people this is like a big thing. For me, I didn't care. I was just like, oh cool, another character. So I am lame, but I appreciate the fun novelty of having Mario and Sonic go at it.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that in an official context like that is sort of a little bit mind blowing. You know, the dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. Um, but we'll get even more of it in the later games, in part because, well, like I said, in Smash 4 they had Mega Man, although they lose Snake, and then Ultimate they have, you know, with a lot of the DLC characters. They even have in Ultimate they even managed to get, you know, patch things up with Microsoft that owns Rare now, and they got Banjo Kazooie, you know.
Yeah, we got Cloud
I wish
and
with
Sora, and like we got all kinds now.
and then also actually going on with that, if they could somehow get Sony to make peace with them, they own the Lemmings franchise. I would have loved to have that in Smash Brothers, but I guess that's not meant to be.
Well, not yet.
But yeah, so if you think this is just the start of things to come in the franchise, I guess the one group of folks who, I don't want to totally discount them, that weren't as happy with Brawl was certainly the competitive scene. And like I said, I don't want to totally discount their opinion. You don't have to think everything's an improvement or, you know, the game. There's definitely some stuff in Brawl that was done to make it more of a party game. Part of that it was just they slowed down the pace a little bit, and they also added some stuff that there were a couple things that competitive players really didn't like. One of those was the tripping mechanic, that you randomly trip sometimes when changing directions or suddenly moving or stuff like that. You can imagine why fighting game folks wouldn't really like that one.
Yeah, people have honed their skills to yes.
And then you always have to have that in the back of your mind. So I can totally understand that. The other thing is that unfortunately this game does not allow patches, at least official ones. So, you know, the competitive scene ended up banning infamously Meta Knight, one of the new characters in the game, and because they just felt he was too overpowered. So that didn't work out for that. But like I said, there was no way they could really patch the game. And they had some other quibbles with it. They wanted to basically make it play more like Melee and restore some of the deleted characters and stuff like that. So there is sort of, let's just say there's some custom versions of Brawl out there, or some modified versions out there. And like I said, I don't really want to endorse those, but I'm not going to pretend they don't exist either. And I understand why some folks, you know, that's always a little bit of a strain between there, is that, you know, you have to make a game that sells well enough. Because this is pretty much, I guess at this point, it might well be the highest selling fighting game series other than maybe Street Fighter. And then even then, you know, that was all, well, it's still around as this franchise, but I don't know. We'll be talking about Street Fighter as a comparison point in a future side game discussion, I can tell you that much. Yeah, so if it wasn't for you, it wasn't for you, you know? You don't have to... But overall, this version was pretty well received, sold very well. It is more or less replaced by some of the newer ones. Obviously, we're still in the Smash Ultimate era. I suspect that when Nintendo finally does release a new system at some point in that console's lifetime, there will be a Smash Brothers game of some sort, just because it's such a reliable... The other interesting thing about all of this is crossovers. You know, people sort of decry them in TV and movies, say, you know, Freddy versus Jason, it's just so much wasted potential, and why won't they finally make that RoboCop Terminator movie or stuff like that? In video games, you know, when crossovers happen, they tend to work really well, and I'm not sure if that's because, like, the seriousness standards is lower or different in video games than it is in a movie or TV show. Or if because they're all electronic in nature, they can mesh more easily. I don't know, but
that's an interesting thought. Like too, because my thought was in a video game, it's not static. It can change every time you play it. Your experience with that mashup, and and like literally every time you put those two characters together, it will be a different experience. And it doesn't have the emotional lifting, I suppose, is done mostly by you and your friends. So yeah, like there's a lot to consider there, that it does seem to work really well in video games and maybe not so much in other media.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just embracing the cheesiness that comes from these types of interactions or what, but yeah, so like I said, I definitely enjoyed this game. I won't say it's perfect or anything, but I think, Anne, it sounds like you had a great time too.
I have never not had a good time with a Super Smash game, but yes, I have a lot of fond memories of this one in particular.
All right. I think we can stop the recording there, and that should cover things. So let's see.
Who was your go-to on Super Smash? Who was your character?
For almost the entire series, my main is probably the closest thing I have to a main is probably Samus. Is sort of my main character.
Very fun.
I just find that, controls well. I've used most of the characters, although, well, in Ultimate, since there's like 70 something now, or 80 or whatever they're up to, I think the last one they had was not one of the Disney characters, but like the main protagonist from Kingdom Hearts, I think was the last bit of DLC characters they say that. Although, man, it would be really funny if like next month they make an update and they put, I don't know, have you played Scarlet and Violet to their end, Anne?
I have not. I have the Team Star people. I have played to their end. I have not taken with Arwen or Arvin, I mean, and Nimona yet. So I'm not the end, but I'm getting there. I'm so close.
Well, let's see. Let me just say that one of those two games, near the end of the game, you're going to encounter something that might work very well as an Echo Fighter in a future Smash Brothers game, and I'm not sure if that was Game Freak's intention. But I will be a little bit vague on that as to not spoil you too much.
Okay.
But yeah, I do wonder at this point, like Smash Brothers is such, like if you get a chance to work on it as a musician or as, a character designer or something, if one of your characters you worked on gets to be in there, it's such a privilege to work on that game. And you sort of saw that keep going. I mean, they tried to make it happen, some of the folks with Melee, but it was just too late in development to add Snake or Sonic in there. And once you got into Brawl, those weren't, I think those rumors had come out by then that there really was an attempt to get those characters in there, not just an EGM April Fool's Day gag.
Mm-hmm.
So those weren't total surprises. And then you get in Smash 4, 3DS and Wii U, you get the you get Mega Man, and I think eventually, well, Bayonetta. I don't know what the exact status of Bayonetta is. If Nintendo just has right of first refusal on the series because they're funding it, or if they actually own the. I think Sega might still own, or Platinum, or somebody still owns that IP, and I forget who it is precisely owns the actual Bayonetta IP. But you get that, and then like I said with 5 Ultimate, it just goes crazy because every it's interesting because in between, Sony, we talked about them a little derisively, I guess, tried to make their own, not an exact copy of Smash Brothers, but it didn't differentiate itself, I guess, in a super interesting way. Maybe All-Star Battle Royale or whatever it's called I think it's on a late PS3 game. And it just didn't really click for them, partially due to some curious omissions. And there are other weird, mashup fighting games out there. Tatsunoko versus Capcom is a big one. And also, it even goes back to the 90s with, Street Fighter versus X-Men, was a big deal there when they got that crossover going. Marvel versus Capcom. It just works so well for some reason. It's all those playground arguments. When you put them in movie form, they tend not to work out so great. When you put them in video game form, you can make something very entertaining. Mm-hmm. Let's see. I'm trying to think. Were there any other third-party characters in Smash 4. Obviously, like I said, there were dozens in there. And like I said, every person wanted to kind of, like I said, people wanted to get a chance to work on or have their work in Smash Brothers as time went on. So, yeah, like I said, it's going to be a little while before we talk about it because we'll have to get through 5th and 6th generation because I think Smash 4 comes in towards the end of the XY generation. It certainly is after X and Y come out because it's got, I believe that it has Greninja in it. And then Smash Ultimate, they add Incineroar. I'm not sure from Scarlet. Well, I mentioned that there is a Pokemon in Scarlet and Violet that might relate to an existing Smash playable Pokemon character that might make an Echo Fighter appearance. I wouldn't be surprised, but
we shall see.
Yeah, we'll see what happens there. But thank you very much, everyone who came in for this. Like I said, our next discussion, we're not sure exactly when this will be because I have some things coming up next month where I will going to be out of town, like Anime Milwaukee is a big one in 2 weeks that I need to go to. So going to interview some folks there. But we'll figure out exactly when we're going to get to Pokemon Rumble Blast. Like I said, it's the second Rumble game of the 4 or 5 that there are, or 6 maybe, I don't know. Like I said, once we finally, you think it's bad now with 3 systems for the 5th generation, and we get to, I forget what the first major mobile game is. Like there is some stuff before Pokemon Go, like Pokemon Shuffle, but I think there's some, I'm trying to remember what like the first, when Magikarp Jump came out and stuff like that, and you get the idea. Things are going to get more complicated going forward. Let's see. I think Pokken Tournament, I think, is a Gen 6 game. For sure. I'm pretty sure, because it has Gen 6. It has Kalos Pokemon in it, even in the base game. I'm pretty sure about that. So, yeah. And then maybe they'll release a movie this year. You never know. I'm hoping they do. I hope they have something that they just are waiting until some, Pokemon Day or something gets released. I really do hope on that one.
We'll see.
Since we didn't get one last year, I mean, I can see why. If this upcoming movie involves Ash extremely little or not at all, I can see why they might be holding that close to the chest because of they wanted to announce that arc is finally coming to a close.
Kind of get people established with environment.
Well, they don't want to make it super obvious. Although obviously, if they did a game based on we've kind of joked that because they seem to be better at CGI animating Pokemon than humans, they should do a Pokemon Mystery Dungeon movie in CGI so that they don't have to animate very many, if any, humans in it. Which would, but if it's anything remotely that looks like it's set in the main anime universe and it doesn't have Ash in it, that would be sort of tipping their hand, so... I could see them putting that off, but overall I think it's just they've been kind of stretched there, but I do still hold out some hope that we're going to see something announced, hopefully for this year, at least in Japan. Maybe comes out over late in the summer or something, and late this year or early next year for America, because it's been, I don't know, I want to talk about another movie and its music, regardless of who's working on it. I want to do that. Because I don't consider the Arceus Chronicles to really be a movie. It's more of a miniseries, and it doesn't have a ton of music. Regardless of version, that's, I also consider it to be one of the few Pokemon things, if you want to count it as a movie, it's one of the few that I would consider outright bad. Personally, I don't know if you've seen it and what your opinion is on the Arceus Chronicles. I saw it at Worlds, which was nice to see it with a group of Pokemon fans, but man, it was like at least 10 or 15 minutes too long for me, and it's like didn't seem to offer. It wasn't as cohesive as I would have liked. So.
Yeah, I have not seen it yet because my anime consumption I'm here for Ash, and I was told Ash was not in it, so it's kind of like
he's in it. He's definitely in it.
Never mind. Yeah. He just moved up to the top of my queue. Although now that you tell me it's bad, I'm very concerned.
Well, it's mostly, to be honest, my one sentence review was kind of a parody of the. You remember in Diamond and Pearl where you get on top of the mountain there on your way to Snow Point City, and you have that cottage there where you can rest, and it says a warm bed and little else. on the
Yes.
sign there. Mine is like, yeah, Gen 4 Gen 4 anime nostalgia and little else.
Okay. Okay. Well,
Like
I maybe I
I
can roll
consider it.
through Gen 4 anime nostalgia. There was a lot going on there.
Yeah. It's like like I think unlike like the Mewtwo Strikes Back evolution that I think is just mediocre and has definitely some issues. This one I felt was like I was waiting for it to end, both in at Worlds and also when I would rewatch it on Netflix, so I could give it a good, legitimate thumbs down. Um,
So
so
you're
your
saying this
mileage
is
may vary. There are some
the
people who
poor
really
man's
like
Mewtwo
it.
Returns.
What?
You're saying this is the poor man's Mewtwo Returns?
No, I'm saying that Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution I think is more thoroughly mediocre than outright bad. I think this one is actually
Just
outright,
straight
at
up
least to
bad.
me,
Okay,
actually bad.
okay.
Kind of like the Volcanion movie, which I didn't like either and thought was way too long and
Oh
stuff
my
like
gosh.
that.
Ash, you can save the world, but you can't save this series. Oh my. Well, okay. Well, it's got my boy. It's at the top of the queue. So I will
Yeah,
be
it takes place in the Journey's chronology because Go is well, not yes Go is there.
okay.
I am
I'm
confused
here for Go. Yeah.
with the guy from Sword and Shield that's your rival, but
Okay.
um
I will settle in with a lot of popcorn and
yeah so
comfort eat my
it's
way through this.
so yeah, like I said, it's only like an hour or so because that's the other thing is it's much shorter than a regular Pokemon movie would be.
Mm-mm.
All right, well I'll hang up the stream now. Like I said, I hope when they do something, and I also want to see them do, even if it's not a direct Detective Pikachu movie sequel, do something in the live action
For
realm.
real, yeah.
I'm guessing, like I said, with the pandemic, I'm sure some things got held up there, but so yeah. All right. Well, thanks, folks. Like I said, we'll see you at some time in the future.
Bye,
Not sure
everyone.
exactly when at this point, but thank you very much.
Thank you for coming out.